The driving force behind capitalism, namely profit, has got out of line with what we as individuals, societies, and the natural world need. When we think about, well, what is a profit? It's not just simply the difference between the revenue and the costs, the operating cost and the capital cost of the company. It's also about the cost of ensuring that companies don't create problems. But at the moment, companies, in many cases, are profiting from creating detriments. And that undermines the functioning of markets. That this isn't just a matter of regulation. It's a matter of ensuring that the underlying principles that are driving companies are consistent. You know, we invented the modern corporation. We invented it in a form that's created immense benefits for us. But we're increasingly realizing that those benefits are coming at a price. My name is Colin Mair. I'm a professor at the Saïd Business School and the Blavatnik School of Government at the University of Oxford. I started off as an economist, in particular a financial economist, focused on the financing of business. Over the last few years, my interests have developed in the direction of what makes for responsible business. What does it mean for a business to have a real corporate purpose? And how can we change the reputation that business has around the world? In January of this year, I published a book entitled Capitalism and Crises: How to Fix Them. It's about why we've got into the mess that we're currently encountering in terms of the ever-growing number of crises, growing in frequency, amplitude, and prevalence around the world. I look at why is this happening? What's the role of capitalism in bringing this about? And in particular, what's the role of business? And what can we do to sort out those problems? Capitalism, first of all, you should recognize has been an incredible contribution to us. It's created economic prosperity, the growth of nations, and the alleviation of poverty around the world. So it's against the background of that we have to look at what's happening recently. But basically, what has happened is that the driving force behind capitalism, namely profit, has got out of line with what we as individuals, societies, and the natural world need. The framework that I develop is around the purpose of business, corporate purpose. And in particular, I define the purpose of business in a particular way. Namely, that business exists to solve problems that you and I face as individuals, societies, and the natural world, but to do so in a particular way. And that is to do it in a profitable way. We're talking about what the best companies and the most successful companies around the world. If you look at what is sometimes termed the Magnificent Seven, the trillion-dollar companies in this country, they all basically have the same feature. They're all highly purposeful. They're all set out to solve really big problems and to find ways of making it commercially viable to do that. Well, what we've got to realize is that a profit derives from a company solving a really big problem and not creating problems. And the implication for that is that when we think about, well, what is a profit? It's not just simply the difference between the revenue and the costs, the operating cost and the capital cost of the company. It's also about the cost of ensuring that companies don't create problems, that they don't pay people below living wages, that they don't pay their suppliers below a fair trade price, that they don't profit from producing pollution, biodiversity loss, or emitting global warming gases, that they recognize that it's their role to avoid those problems, or where they do cause them, to clean up the mess that they create. I was very fortunate to be part of a major investigation by the UK government of how it could make this generation the first generation to leave natural capital in a better state than it found it. And what we did is we set out a plan that the government could use, and in particular, the role that business as well as government can play in doing this. And what this did was to bring out the notion of what does it mean for companies to be sustainable? We talk about sustainability all of the time. And the clear element that came through from that committee was a key component is that companies should ensure that they sustain and restore the natural capital that they use and exploit in their business activities, not just simply undermine them. I'll give you an example from the UK that is currently causing immense problems: the water industry. The most straightforward industry one might imagine of all that a company is doing is delivering water and dealing with sewage. Well, it's turned out that this has been one of the most problematic industries. Why? Because it was privatized, regulated, but nevertheless, what it's doing is, at the moment, profiting significantly from dumping raw sewage into rivers, lakes, and coasts. And that's causing outrage and bringing out exactly what I'm talking about. It's the role of those companies to ensure that they sustain the cleanliness of the water, the rivers, the lakes, and the seashores. What's the big problem of doing this? The answer is that so long as every business recognizes that that is really its purpose, then the best companies come out top. They outcompete other firms. But at the moment, companies, in many cases, are profiting from creating detriments. And that undermines the functioning of markets. We talk about encouraging competition. Competition is great. It does create a run to the top, provided it's the case that it's a level playing field. It's not a level playing field if some companies can profit from, for example, dumping raw sewage into seashores and lakes, etc. That undermines the competition process and it causes a run to the bottom, not to the top. Regulation is important in laying down what are the accepted conventions by which business should operate. But regulation has serious problems, and it's a cause of an immense amount of controversy, in particular in this country, where it's causing considerable political divides between the left and the right. The reason for that is that the left believe that regulation and intensified imposition of regulation is required to avoid these problems. The right says, on the contrary, this is undermining political freedom and liberty, and it's undermining growth, investment, and jobs. And it illustrates that we're not actually going to solve the problem simply by imposing regulation. What we need is for the notion of the company's purpose of being to profit from producing solutions, not problems, that should be inherent, intrinsic to the way in which we structure companies and the way in which companies are run. It's a matter of corporate law, not just about regulation. In the UK, we've got a company law that says that it's the responsibility of the directors to promote the success of the company for the benefit of its shareholders. Okay? That's basically the way in which corporate law operates in the US. But it goes on to talk about that in so doing, the directors of the company should have regard to the consequences of that for other parties, for their employees, for their suppliers, for the environment, etc. Now, if that's interpreted in the right way, that is to say, that companies profit when they're taking due regard for the interests of those other parties, that does exactly what I'm talking about. Put simply, the purpose of a company, as stated in corporate law, should be they profit from producing solutions, not problems. Currently, the boards of companies are not expected to take account of the extent to which their companies are causing detriments for the environment or their employees, etc. But what is happening at the moment is that there are new standards that are being developed by, for example, the International Financial Reporting Standards that has set up an International Sustainability Standards Board to set out the ways in which companies should report on what they are doing in terms of sustainability disclosures in regard to, for example, climate. Or it will go on in due course to talk about the social impacts that companies are having. This is laying down a framework by which companies will report on the extent to which they are profiting from creating problems or solutions for others. When I talk to board members about this, the notion that this is the way in which one should think about the success of the company is precisely in accord with the way in which they look at business. That's exactly the way in which the most successful companies think about their businesses. But they frequently say, well, we're up against a problem. Unfortunately, the rest of the industry isn't always playing according to that type of rule. And that's exactly my point, that this isn't just a matter of regulation. It's a matter of ensuring that the underlying principles that are driving companies are consistent so that all companies realize that this is the basis on which they are playing against each other. What we need to do to address this going forward is to bring together the various parties that recognize that there's a problem and that something needs to change. And there are many companies that are coming together in industry associations, in their particular sectors, to think about, for example, to what extent is the fashion industry clearly creating a major problem around the world in terms of the pollution. And that industry approach is one element, but it's only one element, because it also takes government and bringing government round the table. So one of the things that I'm currently doing is working with governments around the world to work in conjunction with business to think about, well, how does one really move the dial in this area? And there's a part of the world that's particularly interested in this, not just here in America or in Europe, but in the developing and emerging countries, where they are the businesses of the future that at the moment are having a lot of problems in terms of how do they develop against a world which is imposing increasing costs in terms of saying environmental damage has to stop now. They're reasonably saying, well, how can we still expand our economies if it's the case that we're having ever-increasing burdens imposed upon us? And there they recognize that what is needed is to level the playing field, to ensure that those companies that are now expected to avoid detriments are not undermined by companies in the West that are still profiting from creating lots of problems. Institutional investors play a critical role in ensuring this happens, because they obviously control the capital that then drives business. And what they are increasingly recognizing is that it is their responsibility to ensure that the basis on which they are profiting is not through creating detriments for others. Otherwise, it undermines the sustainability of the businesses in which they are investing. And so increasingly, they are looking to engaging with companies in finding out to what extent are they really adopting the right policies. But more needs to happen on this. They are not at the moment sufficiently focused on this, at least in most parts of the world. But there are some investors that really are playing a key role in making this happen. The media and the analysts are key players in terms of bringing this around, because what at the end of the day is really going to transform this is a recognition by you and I as consumers, as communities, as people whose societies are being affected by business. We are going to look to companies and their investors to ensure that the sorts of problems that have been imposed on them will not continue in the future. So we're increasingly seeing the media and the way in which analysts report on the companies that they're investing in, recognizing the importance of not just convincing their own investor community, but the much wider segment of the world that is realizing that business is not just a force for good, but it has also been a source of many of the problems that they're currently encountering. There are two ways in which the transformation can come about. The first is building on something that Milton Friedman once said, that only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. He therefore then went on to say, it's therefore our duty to create new ideas, keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. So that's one approach. We have increasing crises, going on, getting worse in terms of amplitude and impact, until people realize that there has to be a change, and then the change gets enforced upon them. The other is to pick up his idea that actually it's ideas that change the world. You know, we invented the modern corporation. We invented it in a form that's created immense benefits for us. But we're increasingly realizing that those benefits are coming at a price, at a really serious price for us as societies and the environment. And therefore we can recognize that there are other ways of envisaging how business can operate, which aren't revolutions, which are relatively modest reforms that can transform our attitude towards business and the way in which it affects us. And that's what I'm trying to do, to really bring out the realization that it doesn't take a revolution to sort out these problems. It doesn't take a revolution for the emerging and developing world to really prosper and flourish and to become developed alongside the rest of the world. What it takes is a recognition that business was created, should be created to solve problems for us, and that profit should derive from that, not from creating problems for any of us. That is at the heart of what's needed for the change. Milton Friedman did not get it wrong when he said that there is one and only one social responsibility of business: to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits, so long as it stays within the rules of the game. That is to say, engages in open and free competition without deception or fraud. Now that was fine, but it excluded 5 key words: without imposing expense on others, without exporting the costs that it is causing for others to other people. That element then defines what a profit is. And on that basis, what he was saying in terms of the role of business was perfectly reasonable and understandable. But because those 5 words were not included, it has actually created increasing problems for us. Over the last few years, we've seen a considerable backlash to what is termed as woke capitalism. And what exemplifies this is people's views on ESG, environmental, social, and governance factors. And there's a belief that these are actually undermining the way in which business operates, and with some justification. Because, first of all, the notion of ESG is extremely confused. Some people see it as a way of saving the world. Others just see it as, well, another risk that investors have to take account of when they're making investment decisions. Those two views as to what ESG are doing are completely different, and most people are confused about which it is. And furthermore, the measures that are put forward in terms of ESG are not verified, they're not audited. There's a very low correlation between the measures that different providers provide in terms of particular companies. So it's all very confused, and it's undermined the developments that need to take place. What I'm proposing is something that is much more straightforward, that anyone can understand, that really gets to the heart of what people see as the problem. Profit should come from solving problems of others, not creating problems for others. You just measure what is the cost that is required for companies to avoid imposing detriments, and where they do impose detriments, cleaning up the mess and incurring the costs of cleaning up the mess. That's it. You don't have to have things like single materiality, double materiality, extrinsic ESG, intrinsic ESG. It's so much more straightforward and so much more intuitive for anyone to understand.